Unpopular opinion here, but I believe that microtransactions aren't inherently a bad thing. However, the video game industry at large has been pushing harder and harder in the current years to make them seem like such. Now, the point of this video isn't to defend those practices, however. Loot boxes, on the disc DLC, and day one DLC, these concepts for the most part are always done for the sake of making maximum amounts of profit for the lowest amount of work. Instead, I would rather talk about the microtransactions that showcase how they can be introduced to a video game without being harmful, while continuing to bring profit to a company. Before we continue, I want to break this video down into a few sections. Starting off, I want to explain the goods of microtransactions and why in certain means they are okay, the difference on what makes a good microtransaction and a bad one, how they can be added without being harmful, and what we as a community can do about them. Let's begin, shall we? Microtransactions, when done properly, are a way for a company to continue to make profit off their idea, which every business has the right to do. At the end of the day, you have to remember that every single one of these companies is a business. They need to make money to continue to work, to continue to have employees, and continue as a company. Though an argument can be made that after a game is finished, they should just move on, that doesn't take into consideration two things: the people who love the current game and want more of it, and the difficulty of making new IPs and making them stick. You can make a good game that becomes a cult classic, but that doesn't mean it's going to become a commercial success. I want you to think of some of the best and most well-loved video games that you have ever personally played, and you love them for what they are. But out of that list, how many of them fail to be that chart topper, that new thing? One of the best examples I can think of as of late is Skullgirls. Any person wrapped up in the fighting game community can tell you how much love Lab Zero went into care and attention to detail when making that game. And those same people can tell you that after much attention to detail about that game, it only received a middling amount of notice, only 2 Evo appearances, and a general lack of word beyond the few people still playing it to this day. Sure, they could have kept going and making new content, but to what avail? Love and respect only get you so far, and sadly you can't feed mouths off the happiness of a community. Microtransactions are a necessary part of video games in that regard. For the people who do love the content, there needs to be some kind of sales or money generated for the content to continue to be updated. In the case of Skullgirls, or any fighting game for that matter, for a character to be added, new voice lines need to be created and then actually voiced. New character means new attacks, which depending on the game needs someone to either animate it and or draw them up. Work needs to be put into actually putting the attacks into the game and then balancing them and finally marketing. And after all of that, your product might not even be liked at all, and still, some people won't even buy it, not because they don't like the content, but because they don't have personal interest to it. Do remember at the end of the day, while enjoyment should be paramount when it comes to this industry, they need money to continue on. Now, what makes a good or bad microtransaction is entirely subjective. I personally find the loot boxes in Overwatch as a case of bad ones, while others find them fine. That's a whole issue onto itself, and instead I will be focusing on the truths on what should and shouldn't be done at all when it comes to microtransactions. First and foremost, microtransactions should never be there as a case to fix or finish what should have been in the base game already. If a microtransaction was put in place and it stripped core concepts from the base game, or is a fix that the company isn't willing to do for free, it's a bad microtransaction. The first one of these that I ever noticed was back in 2012 with Mass Effect 3. A character was stripped from the base game and was already on the disc, and to get him, you had to pay an additional $10, meaning to get the full extent of what you currently owned, you had to pay $70 rather than $60. Street Fighter Cross Tekken is another example of this, with a decent chunk of the roster, 2 characters in particular even showing up in their trailers being locked behind a paywall, even though modders were able to bypass the content block to get them from the get-go. Funnily enough, not illegal by the way, with how owner laws work, as you own the right to modify any content that you own a physical copy to, at least to an extent. While some publishers might BS you and use their corporate speak to explain this as a good thing or giving you player choice, this mindset is simply a lie. What they're doing is trying to get away with more of your money with less work and without consequence. Quick pause before we get into the rest of the video. If any publisher adds a mechanic and says it's for the sake of player choice and you have to pay for it, that publisher is a lying sack of shit who's basically looking you dead in the eye and telling you You are an idiot for falling for this lie. If it was actually for the sake of player choice, it would be free. This is just more corporate bullshit speak, all in a weak-willed attempt to make you think you're in control when they are. If they were actually advocates for player choice, they would add the true option of player choice that was in back in the days before microtransactions, i.e. cheat codes. Ever notice how in video games you don't have those anymore? Yeah, that's because publishers realize they can make you pay for them instead. Anyway, back to our proper programming. Once again, it's the point of any business to make money. There could be a moral gray area of whether or not microtransactions should even be in a full price title. And again, that is a subject for another video altogether, but it's entirely in a company's right to make a profit. For the most part, most of us don't mind it either. Where it starts to become a problem is when the publishers start pushing it and shoving it down our throats, when it becomes clear that the game is being blatantly undermined for the sake of pushing said microtransactions. Star Wars Battlefront 2, at least now, is a perfectly serviceable game. But at its start, where they had pay-to-win mechanics behind their microtransactions while also trying to act like it was for the sake of player choice, that's where the problems arise. Profit is fine, we get it, you need money. But why do you need to make all the money with no upper limit? Oh right, greed. Now on the flip end of all this, we can look at ways that microtransactions could and should be added with examples that don't harm the player, or at least don't actively harm the player. Again, there's always going to be a gray area no matter what, and my word isn't law. DLC is one of the prior precursors to the modern microtransaction, and they were one of the bases on what good microtransactions could be. It was created well after the base game, coming out sometimes months if not years after the product is done, only to add new content to get more out of the game you already enjoy. Before Bethesda went totally off the deep end, they were fairly okay about this, and yet also started the trend of bullshit DLC when it came to horse armor. Odd how things are coming around full circle now again. Well, purely cosmetic microtransactions that don't do anything to harm the experience by having them or not, and aren't gotten through a manipulative or insidious practice, are another good example. Monster Hunter World does this with having a few outfits, purely cosmetic, to buy, some emotes that give no tactical advantage, and stickers to flaunt about. They don't do anything substantial, they don't derail from the gameplay, they don't bring extra power to the table, and they aren't gotten through any greedy means or manipulative means like a loot box trying to entice you to keep buying just one more and just one more. They're simply there as a true choice to the player. If you get it, fine. If you don't, still fine. This is what a good microtransaction should be. Now, as a community, there are a few things that we can do to fight these practices. We can support and stand behind companies that continue to do good work in the video game industry. We can continue to support the CD Projekt Reds who give us stellar titles like The Witcher 3 while including DLC worth their price tag. We can support indie companies like Yacht Club Games with their titles like Shovel Knight not only making a marvelous game in its own right, but following up with their promises for creating free DLC while finding other means to continue to profit off their product. It seems like such a small thing, and at times in the long run, it might not feel like it's worth it. But for every one of us that does stand up and fight these practices, it does start to trickle, and we can see it with the dives in stock a lot of the massive AAA companies are currently facing right now. Now of course, it isn't entirely based off the backlash, and likely has a far larger part to do with the market itself, but it is fair to assume that at least part of it has to do with the gamers finally waking up to the correction, as well as the legislation coming down on their heads about loot boxes and other microtransactions. I want to end this video on a bit of a higher note once again and say that microtransactions aren't inherently a bad thing. Also, just remember that it generally isn't the fault of the video game developers, but the publishers who put these items in video games. So make sure to point your weapons at the proper people, please. We as gamers just want a little respect. We just want to be treated with at least the most common levels of decorum and decency. Publishers, stop treating us like we're idiots. Like we're children who are too blind to see through your greed. Stop saying that you have to add microtransactions that purposely harm your game, because as we can see, that's only a bit of lies that can only keep going before you start to fall. Especially when there's plenty of games and cases that show that you don't need to do this. My only hope is that you guys figure it out before it's too late. But let's be honest, you guys are the AAA video game industry. You won't. You just won't. On the bright side, when you guys crumble, we'll get all the developers who truly do care about video games making more passion projects and getting more games on Kickstarter. Let's just hope they don't turn out like Mighty Number 9. Never forget. Never forget. I know I said that was the end of the video, but I guess I'm going to be rambling just for a tiny bit. For anyone who is still watching, this before was the end. You could stop watching now. But if anyone wants to hear just my thoughts about everything for not just this video, but this year so far, feel free to stay. I just want to say, for anyone who has been watching, thank you very much. I will try to be far more consistent and far faster with my uploads this year as the new year comes around. I don't really know what to say here besides just thank you. If you want to see more of my content and know when I post content immediately, make sure to click that notification button. And my next Let's Play, which even to this moment I still haven't really decided yet, but my next Let's Play will be starting tomorrow on the 1st of the year, right? I hope everyone out there has a Merry New Year or Happy New Year, however you say it, and you can live out all your resolutions and junk. Anyway, later.